Welcome to Year Zero Vlogs. This is the documentation of my last year in academia. At the end of the year, I will start my own business, helping other academics to teach better. When people talk about their own PhD or a PhD in general, in the life sciences or elsewhere, they usually circle around the similar set of themes, and so will I in this video. So the first obvious question that I answer is, why do or not do a PhD? I needed to do a PhD because I wanted, from a very early time point on, I wanted to pursue an academic research career. And that's why after studying, one has to do a PhD to then continue in the academic career track. I knew that the decision of where to do a PhD and on what topic was critical. Sometimes the where is more important than the topic, and for me, everything started with a place and topic switch. Actually, I started somewhere else to do a PhD, and then I noticed that I'm not so much interested in directly going into the clinical translational research. I wanted to learn more about the basic principles and do basic research, and hence I came here to this very impressive building, had my interview and started my PhD, my real PhD thesis here at this Max Planck Institute. This building was the old building with the laboratories in the basement and in an adjacent building, and I spent here only 1 year, and then I could move to a very modern new research building. What is a PhD? The emphasis is on the training to become an independent scientist. So it is not just following protocols or learning how to get around in the lab. It is planning experiments, executing experiments, writing research papers, communicating research by presenting posters and seminars at research conferences. All that. Going into a PhD, there is a theoretical basis, and then the PhD is learning, executing, iterating. And you get out of the PhD with a lot of unique experience, and no PhD is alike. Every PhD thesis and every PhD journey will be a unique story. So what about the typical day-to-day life and workload? Yeah, I remember I was not often sitting in cafes like I am here, enjoying a latte macchiato. I was either at home for sleeping and the necessary life duties, or I was in the lab. We were very competitive, and mammalian cell culture also required a lot of attention, so it was clear that it's an advantage to live very close to the institute, and I lived very close to the institute. So there were periods that were a little bit slower, but there were also periods of intense push before deadlines, for example, when I wanted to present something at a conference or when drafting a manuscript. Apart from working a lot during a PhD thesis, one should also not forget that it is a lot of fun, especially with the degree of freedom that I had. This is the new building, the very modern research building that I was talking about, and the majority of my PhD I spent here on the 3rd floor. What is really important for any PhD is the supervision and the lab environment. As I had the experience that the supervision can just leave you because academics change jobs, I personally find the organization and lab environment much more important than the supervision, because you can find teachers and mentors around. You don't necessarily need a direct supervisor. But the lab environment and organization decides if you will be a disciplined and organized researcher yourself. This is the place where I did my PhD thesis. Feels like ages ago. Yeah. In the labs up there. Many years, many days and nights. This was the phase where I was growing most as a scientist. I had a degree of freedom that challenged me a lot,
And at the same time, this was the best opportunity that I could ever have asked for.
This opportunity also came with struggles. Like in every PhD thesis, there are ups and there are downs. And a low point is if you feel very lonely in your thesis and in life, and that happened to me, like for a lot of my colleagues, and the feeling of being behind or the feeling of not being enough, like what we nowadays call imposter syndrome. Well, we're constantly struggling at the frontier, basically. And that's also how it's supposed to be, because that is how an academic research life will be. So it's the perfect preparation for that kind of life. Coping strategies for the emotional roller coaster in a PhD are obviously support networks and to also have realistic expectations. What is progress? Define progress, the small wins of every day, the perfect execution of an experiment, reproducibility in a complex system, and celebrating small wins. That's what I did. Small milestones, small steps. And I was very proud to have achieved those.
If you have a PhD, do you ever read your PhD thesis, the printed version that you have somewhere in your bookshelf? I admit it, I do. And I can only recommend it because no matter how you look back on your PhD thesis, you really see how intense this time was, and you can appreciate what you learned and what you achieved. I'm proud of my thesis. I like to open this document. I have printed it also in a nice way, as I always wanted. And I like to take it out of the bookshelf once a year and read what my younger self has phrased and interpreted and found and thought.
What are the skills that you actually develop in a PhD thesis? The obvious research skills like designing a study, handling literature, methods, maybe coding or in general analysis of data. Of course, academic writing and, in a perfect world, academic publishing. The hidden skills are maybe much more important. It's project management, resilience, dealing with rejection, communicating complex ideas, networking is a big one, and sometimes teaching and supervision. At the Max Planck Institute, it was less teaching, but also working together with colleagues and in part supervision, a little bit of supervision. People always ask PhD holders, what were the challenges and the low points? Always interested for the crisis. And yeah, obviously failed experiments give you some sleepless nights, and paper rejection is not nice. If the supervisor suddenly leaves, not a good situation. You're a young person, you experience all those things for the first time, so that you don't have any experience and you have no idea about the outcome. For international students, it might be funding insecurity, visa stress, and yeah, burnout is an issue. But there are many videos out there that show you examples, and I want to emphasize that every story is really unique. So what are my final words, the verdict? You know me, for me it was the right decision. I would do it again, exactly like I did. I would make the same decisions again. And that's what I can only suggest to everybody. Make active decisions, stick with those decisions, evaluate how it's working for you, and at some point also make a decision to draw the line. Maybe you have to quit a position, seek for another opportunity, because that's better for you. And I can tell from my own experience that can change everything. It starts with being honest to oneself and just facing reality.